going to go over the Class A pre-trip inspection for a semi-tractor trailer. You do get this handy dandy check sheet now to take when you go test, and so we'll use it as we go through, check off the boxes as we go. So the first thing you'll do is you'll enter the truck with 3 points of contact. When you're inside the truck, you'll start your pre-trip inspection with anything that you can do with the key turned off. So the first thing I'd like to do is check all my emergency equipment. I want to make sure that I have a fire extinguisher that is mounted and secure, the gauge is in the green, the pin and seal is in place, it's properly charged. I want to check to make sure I have 3 red reflective triangles that are not cracked, broken, or missing, and they're the proper color, they're mounted and secure. And I want to make sure that I have spare fuses for the trip. So that's all the emergency equipment, and we can check that box off. The next thing I want to do is I want to check my horns. I want to check both my city and my air horn, and you'll physically check both of them. And that's it for horns. Now I want to check my windshield and my traffic monitoring devices, which are my mirrors. So I'll check my windshield. I want to make sure that my windshield is clean, free of any obstructions. It's not cracked, broken, or missing. And then I want to check my mirrors. I want to make sure that my mirrors are in good condition. I want to make sure they're clean and adjusted properly for me. And that takes care of the windshield and the mirrors. Really, that's all I can check with the truck not running. So the next process would be is to perform a safe start on the truck. You want to make sure the truck is in neutral. You want to make sure your parking brakes are set. You're going to watch for your ABS light to come on and then go off shortly after starting the truck. Now with the truck running, I want to start by checking all my heaters, defrosters, and fans on every speed to make sure they work correctly. So you'll pick a selection, turn the blower on, work it down. You'll do it on every setting to make sure that it works as it should, and it does. So that's heaters, defrosters, and fans. Next, I'll check my wipers and my washers. I want to make sure that my windshield wipers are mounted secure. I want to make sure the blades are in good condition. I want to make sure that everything works properly, that they will sway and spray, and make sure I have no leaks or any loose blades or anything like that. And then after you do that, you can actually check off your wipers and washers. And now I want to check all my lighting indicators. To check your lighting indicators, you'll do the indicator and you will point to the indicator in the dash. So to start with, I'll check my left turn signal and the indicator in the dash. I want to check my right turn signal and the indicator in the dash. I want to check my 4-way flashers and the indicators in the dash. And now I'll check my high beams and make sure the indicator in the dash works as well. That's all for indicators, so you can check that box. Next, I want to do a service brake check. In order to do the service brake check, I'm going to release my parking brakes. I'm going to pull forward to approximately 5 miles per hour. I'm going to take my hand off the wheel and apply the brake to make sure that the truck does not pull from side to side. You'll want to tell the tester first and then do it. Back in neutral, parking brakes are set, and you have successfully completed your service brake check. Next will be your parking and trailer brake check, also known as your tug test. So to do your tug test, the first thing you're going to do, and you can do it in either order, but you have to do it for each. The first thing I'm going to do is release my trailer brakes. I'm going to release my trailer brakes and leave my truck brakes set. We're going to check to make sure that our truck brakes hold correctly. So with the trailer brake released, the truck brake set, I'll put the truck in the lowest gear possible and attempt to move forward. And as soon as you feel just a little bit of a tug, like that right there, that is sufficient. Now I want to switch the order. I want to set my trailer brakes and release my truck brakes. Now we're going to check to make sure our trailer brakes hold. Lowest gear possible, just a little ease until you start to feel a tug. As soon as you feel a tug, that is sufficient, and you'll set your brakes, truck back in neutral. So that completes the parking brake and trailer brake check, also known as your tug test. Now the next process is your air brake check. Now your air brake check is a pass-fail for the test. And when you complete all these items, you will tell your tester, now I'm ready to do my air brake check. And he will read you 1 to 2 paragraphs explaining what to do. To sum it up is pump your brakes down to approximately 90 psi and begin your tug test. So you'll be sitting here with your truck running. The first thing you're going to do is turn your truck off. And you're going to turn your key back on so your gauges work. All right, you're going to watch your air gauges. You're going to pump your brakes until you're at approximately 90 psi. And then you'll begin your air brake check. The first thing you're going to say is to the tester is, now I'm going to start my truck. I'm going to listen for my air compressor to shut off my governor to shut off my air compressor at a range of 120 to 140 psi. Tell him first and then do it. So we've told him, now we're going to start the truck. And you're just going to sit here and wait to listen for your governor to cut off your air compressor at a range of 120 to 140 psi. And you're listening to hear the little pop off of air. And there it is. Now I'm going to shut my truck off. I'm going to turn my key back on so my gauges work. I'm going to release my parking brakes, and I'm going to apply my service brake to make sure I lose no more than 4 psi in 1 minute. So you'll tell him first and then do it. Push in your parking brakes. You let everything settle. Once everything settles down, you're going to apply your service brake. And in your mind or with a watch, you're going to start timing 60 seconds. Well before that happens, your tester will say, okay, your minute has passed. After he tells you your minute has passed, you release the brake. Now the next process is I'm going to pump my brakes to make sure that my low pressure warning light and buzzer activate before I drop below 55 psi. So you just do that. Again, tell him first and then do the process. And there it is. The low warning buzzer is activated. Now I'm going to continue to fan my brakes to make sure that my valves pop out and my trailer brakes set at a range of 20 to 45 psi. And then you tell him first and then you just do the process until it happens. And there it is. The valves popped out, and this concludes your air brake check. Now, before we get out of the cab, there's one more thing you need to do for your tester. We can check off our air brake check now. That was done successfully. The last thing you're going to tell your tester before you get out of the cab and start the exterior is, at this time I'd like to check all my exterior lights. In order to do this properly, Mr. Tester, I would either need to get out of the truck myself or I would ask you for help. And a couple things will happen at that point. He will either say, let's do that now, and then he will exit the truck and you'll just follow his orders. He'll ask for headlights, high beams, low beams, right turn signal, left turn signal. He'll go to the back of the truck, do brake lights, four-way flashers, all that. He'll either do that, or he may say, let's do that later, or he may say, let's not worry about it. But either way, whatever happens at that point, you are now safe to check that box. So this completely concludes the in-cab portion of our pre-trip. Next section is we'll get out of the truck and we will start at the front of the truck with our exterior portion. So it's important to remember when you exit the truck and enter the truck that you always use 3 points of contact. If you do not use 3 points of contact, that could result in an automatic fail. So now we're at the exterior portion. The first thing I want to do is I want to check all my lights. I want to check my clearance lights, check my headlights, my turn signals, and my running lights. I want to make sure they are not cracked, broken, or missing, and that they are all the proper color. Then you can check off that you checked your lenses at the front of the vehicle. Now I'll need to raise the hood, so I'm going to unlatch the hood. When you raise the hood, it's the same way, 3 points of contact. Now we'll start on the passenger side. And this is all right here in your checklist. On the passenger side of your truck, every truck could be different. Whatever fluid levels you have on this side of the truck, that's what you're checking. So I'm going to start with my coolant reservoir. I want to make sure that my reservoir is mounted and secure, make sure it's not cracked, broken, or missing, make sure the cap is in place, make sure it's not leaking, and make sure that I am at the safe and proper operating level. The next fluid is my windshield washer reservoir. I want to make sure the reservoir is mounted and secure, it's not cracked, broken, or missing, the cap is in place, it's not leaking, and again, I'm at the safe, proper operating level. Before we leave this side, we need to do an overall assessment of this side of the engine to make sure I have no fuel, fluid, or air leaks. Now we'll do the same thing on the driver's side. On the driver's side, we're going to start with the fluid levels again. I'm going to check my power steering reservoir to make sure the reservoir is mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or missing. The cap is in place and it's not leaking. I want to make sure I'm at the safe, proper operating level. Next is your engine oil. I want to check my engine oil dipstick. I'm going to make sure I am at the safe, proper operating level. You don't physically have to pull the dipstick out that day and check it, but if he would ask you, how would you do that? Then you would simply tell him I would pull the dipstick out, wipe it clean, reinsert it. And when I pull the dipstick back out, I want to make sure that I am between the add and the full mark. So, and then after the fluid levels, now I want to do an overall assessment of this side of the engine to make sure I have no fuel, fluid, or air leaks. And so that takes care, since we've checked them on both sides now, we can check off fluid levels, we can check off fluid and air leaks, and that moves us into our steering system. We'll start with our steering system on this side of the truck. That's where it's located. I want to start with my steering column. I want to check my steering column and my knuckle. I want to make sure they're not cracked, broken, or missing, and that they are in good condition, free of any damage. Now I want to check my gearbox. I want to check my gearbox to make sure it is mounted secure, free of any damage, and not leaking, because there is either oil or grease in these. And from there, I want to check my pitman arm and my drag link, my tie rod and tie rod ends. I want to make sure they're all mounted secure, free of any damage. I want to make sure all my nuts, bolts, and cotter keys are in place. And that covers steering system. Next, I want to move out to the tires. I want to check my tires. I want to make sure my steer tire has at least 4/32 of an inch of tread. I want to make sure the tread is worn evenly. There is no rips, tears, cuts, or bulges in the tire. And I want to check for my proper inflation through my valve stem and cap. That takes care of your tire. Now I want to check my rim. I want to make sure my rim is in good condition, make sure I have no dents, no illegal welds on the rim, just to make sure it's in good condition. And that's it for the rims. Now you want to check your lug nuts. I want to check all my lug nuts to make sure, first of all, they're in place. I want to make sure they're all tight. I want to make sure I don't have any rust trails off the lug nuts, which could indicate a loose wheel. And that's it for lug nuts. Now we'll go back inside here just a little bit. Now I want to check my springs and my spring mounts. I want to check my springs and my spring mounts to make sure that they are mounted secure. They're not cracked, broken, or missing. They're free of any damage. Make sure the springs are not shifted or broken. I want to make sure my U-bolts are in place and make sure they are tight. I also want to check my shock. I want to make sure that my shock is mounted secure, free of any damage, and make sure it's not leaking, because your shock does have fluid inside of it. So that checks off that box. Now I'd like to check all my brakes, lines and hoses. I want to make sure the brake lines and hoses are all mounted secure, connected at each end, make sure they're not ripped, torn, or frayed, and make sure they're not leaking. And now I want to check to make sure I'm free of any brake contaminants. You can't really see it, but inside of here, you're going to tell him that you're going to check your brake drums and linings to make sure they are free of any contaminants, which could include grease, oil, water, or dust. And that checks that off. Now we'll step away from the side and start on the side of the vehicle. On the side of the vehicle, similar to the front, we're going to check all of our lights and lenses and any reflective tape we may have. I want to make sure that my lights and lenses, my turn signals, my clearance lights, my multi-function lights, make sure they're not cracked, broken, or missing, and that they are the proper color. Now I'm going to check my traffic monitoring devices, which are your mirrors. On the outside, I'm going to check the mirrors to make sure that the mirrors are mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or missing. On the inside, we check functionality, make sure they're clean. On the outside, we check mounted and secure, not cracked, broken, or missing. Now I'd like to check my battery and battery box. I want to make sure my battery box is mounted secure to the truck. I want to make sure that my batteries are mounted secure to the battery box. I want to make sure the batteries, I want to make sure all the connections are tight, make sure I don't have any corrosion, make sure their caps are in place, and like everything else, mounted and secure. And that's it for batteries. Now I like to check my fuel tank and the straps and the lid. I want to check to make sure that my fuel tank is mounted secure, make sure the straps are in place and in good condition. I want to make sure my cap is in place and that I'm not leaking any fuel. Takes care of fuel tank. Now I want to check my frame. You can see it real good here, so I like to check it here. I want to tell him that I want to check my frame and cross members, front to back, side to side, make sure the frame has no damages, no illegal welds, no rust holes, make sure nothing's cracked, bent, broken, or missing. And that takes care of the side of the vehicle. Now we'll start with the combination portion here. To do that, we're going to start with our air lines and our electrical lines. You want to make sure that your air lines and your electrical line is tied up and secure. Make sure it's not touching the catwalk. Make sure it's connected at each end. Make sure there's no rips, tears, cuts, bulges, no bare wires, no air leaks. And you want to check your glad hands on each end to make sure they're mounted secure and free of any damage. And that takes care of your air and electrical lines. Now you want to check your fifth wheel skid plate. That's tucked up underneath here. You're going to check your fifth wheel skid plate to make sure that it is mounted secure, make sure it's free of any damage, and make sure that it is lubricated properly. Next is the kingpin, apron, and gap. So I'm going to check my trailer apron. That's mounted to your trailer. I want to check my trailer apron to make sure it is mounted secure, make sure it doesn't have any illegal welds on it, make sure it doesn't have any cracks, make sure there's no broken or missing pieces. That's the apron. And then you want to check your kingpin. You want to make sure your kingpin is mounted secure to your trailer apron, free of any damage. And then you want to check the gap between your trailer apron and your fifth wheel to make sure that there is no gap, zero gap between the apron and the fifth wheel. That checks off that box. Next is your locking and safety devices. So you start with your handle, you have a disengage handle. You want to make sure that that handle is in the fully locked position. Then you want to check your fifth wheel slide plate to make sure it is completely locked. And then you want to tuck in behind here and take a look up in to make sure that your jaws are completely locked around your kingpin, and that's in your fifth wheel device. That is all your locking and safety devices. Now we'll move here to our landing gear or your dollies. You want to make sure your landing gear is mounted and secure, free of any damage. You want to make sure it is fully raised and that the handle is in the stowed position, and you want to check to make sure you have enough clearance between the landing gear and the truck for turning. That takes care of that. Now we'll step back away from the trailer just a little bit, and now we're going to check the side of the trailer. We're going to check all our lights, lenses, and reflectors, similar to like we did on the truck. You want to check all your clearance lights, your turn signals, your multi-function lights, your ABS lights, any lights you have on the side of the trailer, turn signals. You want to make sure they're not cracked, broken, or missing, and that they are the proper color. Same way with your reflective tape. You want to make sure your reflective tape is in place, make sure it's free of any damage, and that it's all the proper color. And that checks off reflective tape on the side of the trailer. Now we'll go to the rear of the trailer. And we'll do the rear of the trailer just like we did the front of the truck. We're going to start by checking all of our lights and lenses. You want to check your clearance lights, your turn signals, your tail lights, your brake lights, your backup lights, your license plate light, any lights you may have back here. You want to make sure that they are not cracked, broken, or missing, and that they are the proper color. Same way with your reflective tape and any reflectors you may have. Make sure they're in good condition, free of any damage, and are the proper color. And that checks off the rear of the trailer. Now generally we would walk up the right side of the truck, and the only thing that you would talk about on the right side of the truck would be any differences from the left side of the truck. On this truck there is no differences. The only thing you may encounter would be a DEF tank. It could be on either side of the truck. This truck is old enough it doesn't have one, but if you have a DEF tank, you would check it the same way you did your fuel tank, mounted secure, caps in place, and not leaking. So that concludes our Class A checklist for our pre-trip for a Class A combination air brake semi truck and trailer.